Evelyn, look at me! Stay with me!
William, I can't see you.
The rain had turned the country road into a ribbon of mud by the time Evelyn Hartwell's carriage reached the Ashbourne estate. She had just leaned forward to ask the driver whether they should stop when one of the horses reared. The carriage lurched violently. A wheel struck the edge of the road, wood cracked beneath her, and the world tilted before she could draw breath. Then came the fall. Glass shattered. The carriage rolled down the embankment and struck the earth with such force that Evelyn's head slammed against the wooden frame. For several moments she heard nothing but rain. Then a man's voice called through the wreckage. "Can you hear me?" Evelyn tried to move, but part of the broken carriage pinned her skirt beneath a heavy beam. "Yes," she whispered. "My name is William Ashbourne. I'm going to get you out." She turned toward his voice, though the darkness around her did not change. William had been returning from a neighboring estate when he saw the overturned carriage. Without waiting for his coachman, he crossed the flooded ditch and climbed down the slope with his footman close behind. Through the broken door, he saw a young woman trapped beneath splintered wood. Blood marked her temple, but she was conscious. "Hold still," he told her. Together, William and his footman lifted the beam. The damaged roof shifted above them, and William reached inside, pulling Evelyn free just before another section collapsed. She caught his coat with both hands. "Why is it still dark?" William glanced at the storm clouds. "It is late afternoon." "No." Her breathing became. "Why can't I see you?" Her eyes were open but they did not focus on his face. William carried her toward his carriage. "You are injured. The physician will examine you at Ashbourne Hall." "Am I blind?" He could not answer. So he said, "You are safe." By evening, Evelyn lay in a guest chamber while Dr. Ellison examined the wound near her temple. Her father, a village schoolmaster, arrived soon afterward and sat beside her, pale with worry. William waited outside until the physician emerged. "Her life is not in danger, Dr. Ellison. There are no broken bones, but the blow to her head was severe. And her sight. The eyes themselves appear unharmed. The blindness may be caused by swelling or trauma. Will it pass? It may return in days, months, or not at all." William looked through the open doorway. Evelyn sat upright against the pillows, listening as her father tried to reassure her. "Bring whatever specialists are necessary," William said. "I will cover every expense." The physician nodded. When William entered, Evelyn turned toward his footsteps. "Your Grace." "Yes. My father says you saved my life. I happened to be on the road." That is a very modest way to describe climbing into a collapsing carriage. "You may stay here until the road is safe," he said. Her father began to object, but William continued, "and until Miss Hartwell is strong enough to travel." Evelyn lifted her chin. "I do not wish to become an obligation. You are a guest. There's often little difference." William nearly smiled. "You've known me less than a day and already distrust my hospitality. I distrust anything I cannot repay. Then recover quickly. That will be repayment enough." During the following days, Evelyn learned the shape of her new darkness. She counted the steps between the bed and the window. She memorized the position of every chair and asked the servants not to move anything. When a maid tried to guide her everywhere, Evelyn politely refused. "If people carry me through every room, I will never learn to walk through one alone." William heard her say it from the doorway. The next morning, he brought her a book. "What is it?" she asked. "Poetry." "That depends on the poet." "Wordsworth." "Acceptable." He sat near the window and began to read. Estate papers waited in his study, and Parliament had sent 3 letters requiring answers. He remained for almost an hour. The reading became a habit. William visited most mornings, sometimes with poetry and sometimes with newspapers. Evelyn listened, interrupted, disagreed, and corrected him whenever she believed he rushed an important sentence. In the afternoons, they walked in the garden. At first, she held his arm and counted every step from the terrace to the fountain. Later, she needed only the sound of his voice beside her. "What color are the roses?" she asked one afternoon. "Red." "What kind of red?" William considered this. "The sort roses usually are." "That is a terrible description. I am a duke, not a painter." "Then describe what they remind you of." He looked at the flowers. "Candlelight through dark wine." Evelyn smiled. "That is better." Weeks became months. Her bruises faded, but her sight did not return. Yet the fear she had carried after the accident slowly softened. She laughed more easily. William found himself arranging his days around their walks and reading hours, though he never admitted it. He told himself he was responsible for her. The explanation became less convincing each day. One winter morning, Evelyn woke before sunrise. For the first time in months, the darkness was not complete. A thin line of pale gold appeared between the curtains. She raised her hand. At first, it was only a shadow. Then she saw the blurred movement of her own fingers. Her breath caught. She crossed the room slowly and pulled the curtain aside. The garden beyond the glass was indistinct, but light covered the snow, and the trees stood like dark shapes beneath the morning sky. She could see. Not clearly. But enough. Footsteps approached in the corridor. William. Evelyn recognized the measured rhythm immediately. She returned to her chair just as the door opened. He entered carrying a book and a small vase of winter roses. "You are awake early. So are you. I brought something to improve the room." He placed the flowers beside her. Evelyn could make out the outline of his tall figure and the pale blur of the roses between. For months, she had imagined his face. Now she was close to seeing it. William opened the book, unaware that anything had changed. Evelyn lowered her eyes and said nothing. Winter settled quietly over Ashbourne Hall. The gardens lost their color beneath a blanket of frost. And each morning, William found Evelyn waiting in the conservatory before breakfast. Where the glass roof welcomed the pale sunlight she could now secretly see. Her vision had returned little by little. Not perfectly. The edges of distant objects still blurred together, and bright light sometimes left her eyes aching. But she no longer needed to count every step. She no longer reached for furniture before crossing a room. Only William didn't know. Whenever he entered, Evelyn instinctively lowered her eyes and let habit guide her movements. She hated deceiving him. Yet each day she remained silent. One afternoon, William found her standing beside a flowering camellia. "I brought another physician from London," he said. "You've already brought 3. He specializes in injuries like yours." Evelyn smiled softly. "You never seem to give up." "Should I?" "No." He stepped closer. "If there is even the smallest chance," she interrupted gently. "I know." He did not finish the sentence. Instead, he offered his arm as he always did. Evelyn hesitated for the briefest moment before placing her hand upon it. The gesture, once necessary, now felt painfully dishonest. Yet she still accepted it. Because letting go somehow frightened her even more. The following week, Ashbourne Hall hosted a small winter charity luncheon. Several neighboring noble families attended. William almost cancelled when he realized Evelyn might feel uncomfortable among strangers, but she insisted on joining them. "I've hidden from enough things already." He admired her courage more than he admitted. Throughout the afternoon, William remained quietly attentive. He described each guest. Moved chairs before she reached them, poured her tea. Described the paintings hanging across the drawing room walls. To everyone watching, he seemed impossibly considerate. To Evelyn, something had begun to hurt. Not his kindness, but the reason behind it. Later, while William was called away to speak with a magistrate, Evelyn stepped onto the gallery overlooking the ballroom. She had intended only to enjoy a few minutes of silence. Instead, she heard 2 ladies speaking nearby. "The Duke has become a saint. He spends nearly every day with that poor girl. I suppose guilt can become a powerful form of devotion." The second woman laughed softly. "It isn't love. No, a duke doesn't marry a blind woman because he falls in love." She lowered her voice. "He marries her because he cannot bear to abandon someone whose life changed saving her." The first lady sighed. "How tragic. Very noble." Their footsteps faded down the corridor. Evelyn remained perfectly still. Not one word they had spoken sounded cruel. That was what made it hurt. Because somewhere inside herself, she had wondered exactly the same thing. That evening, William found her unusually quiet during dinner. "You've hardly touched anything." "I'm simply tired. Would you like me to read tonight?" She looked toward his voice. "Yes." He opened a volume of poetry they had nearly finished together. As he read, Evelyn watched him without fear for the first time. She could finally see the face she had imagined for months. His dark hair fell carelessly across his forehead after a long day. Fine lines appeared near his eyes whenever he smiled at a passage he particularly liked. His hands turned each page with surprising gentleness. There was no performance. No audience. No expectation of gratitude. Only kindness. She loved him. She knew it completely now. And that certainty terrified her. Because she still didn't know whether the man before her loved Evelyn Hartwell, or the blind woman whose accident had become his responsibility. Christmas approached. Ashbourne Hall glowed with candlelight, evergreen garlands, and music drifting through the corridors. One snowy evening, William found Evelyn standing alone beside the great entrance hall. "The snow is beautiful," he said automatically. Then he stopped. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "I keep describing things you cannot see." Evelyn closed her eyes. "If only you knew." "I don't mind," she whispered. "I hope one day you will." "So do I." Neither realized they were speaking about different things. A few days later, William invited her to walk through the rose garden despite the cold. Most flowers had disappeared beneath winter, leaving only bare branches dusted with snow. As they reached the center path, William stopped. "I've been thinking," Evelyn felt her heartbeat quicken. "You've been here nearly 6 months." "Yes. My house has become strangely quiet whenever you're away." She smiled faintly. "I thought dukes preferred quiet." "I did," he laughed softly, "until recently." He looked at her for a long moment. "Evelyn. I know I cannot promise what tomorrow brings. I know your sight may never return. I know society will have opinions." He drew a slow breath. "I've discovered I no longer care." Evelyn felt tears gather before she could stop them. William reached into his coat. Not for a ring, only for her hand. He held it carefully between both of his. "I don't want you facing whatever future comes next alone. Will you marry me?" The world became impossibly still. This was everything she had. Everything she had feared. If she accepted, would he be marrying the woman he loved? William smiled with quiet relief. He lifted her hand and kissed it gently. Because they did not come from happiness alone. They came from the growing certainty that every day she delayed the truth, the harder it would become to tell it. Preparations for the wedding transformed Ashbourne Hall into a place of quiet celebration. Seamstresses arrived almost every morning carrying boxes of silk and lace, florists filled the corridors with fresh winter roses. And servants hurried from room to room discussing guest lists, menus, and musicians. To everyone around them, it appeared to be the beginning of a joyful future. Only Evelyn knew that each passing day brought her closer to a truth she no longer knew how to confess. Her sight had returned almost completely. She could now distinguish every detail of William's face, the silver embroidery on his waistcoat. And even the tiny scar near his right eyebrow that he had once dismissed as an old riding accident. Yet every time he offered his arm or carefully described the colors of the evening sky, guilt settled more heavily upon her heart. She had never intended to deceive him for so long. She had only wanted a little more time. Time to discover whether the tenderness she saw in his eyes belonged to love or merely to responsibility. Unfortunately, the longer she waited, the more impossible the truth became. One afternoon, several days before the wedding, William was called away to settle an urgent matter concerning one of his tenant farms. Evelyn remained alone in the library, surrounded by shelves that had become familiar through months of listening rather than seeing. She wandered slowly between the bookcases, smiling as she finally allowed herself to read the titles she had imagined for so long. There was something strangely emotional about seeing the room with her own eyes after having memorized every corner in darkness. She reached for a volume of Shakespeare placed high above her head. As she pulled it free, another book slipped from the shelf. Without thinking, she lifted her hand. The heavy volume landed neatly in her palm before it reached the floor. At that very moment, the library door opened, and William stopped walking. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched across the room until it became almost unbearable. Evelyn slowly lowered the book. William looked from the book in her hand to her eyes and then to the shelf she had reached without hesitation. His voice remained calm, but she heard something inside it quietly breaking. "You caught it." She nodded. "Yes. You saw it falling." Another small nod. "I did." That somehow hurt even more. "My sight began returning several months ago." William stared at her as though trying to understand words that refused to fit together. "Several months. It wasn't all at once. But you knew." "Yes. And you never told me." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "I wanted to. Every day. Every day." William turned away and rested one hand against the edge of the desk. He was not angry in the way Evelyn had feared. He did not shout or accuse her. The disappointment in his face was quieter than anger and therefore much harder to bear. I spent months believing you still couldn't see. I know. I described every room we entered. I remember. I held your arm because I thought you needed me. I know. His shoulders rose with a slow breath before he faced her again. Then tell me why. Tears gathered in Evelyn's eyes before she answered. Because everyone kept saying you pitied me. William frowned. I never pitied you. I wanted to believe that. You should have. She shook her head. I heard people whisper that you were sacrificing your future because you felt responsible for the accident. They admired your kindness, William, but no one believed you loved me. After hearing it often enough, I began wondering if they were right. William remained. So I told myself that if I waited a little longer, I would know the truth. I thought that one day you would look at me without seeing someone broken. And instead, every day became harder to confess than the one before. The room fell silent again. William closed his eyes briefly. You should have trusted me. I know. You should have trusted what we built together. I know. She took one hesitant step toward him. I wasn't testing you. What were you doing? I was afraid. The answer was barely louder than a whisper. I had already lost my sight once. I couldn't bear the thought of discovering that I would lose your love the moment you no longer felt responsible for me. William looked at her for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had become almost weary. I don't know what hurts more. The lie. He paused. Or the fact that you believed my love was so fragile. Evelyn felt her heart sink. Neither of them had anything left to say. Some wounds could not be healed in a single conversation. That evening, William quietly instructed his steward to postpone the wedding. No announcement explained why. Within 2 days, however, London society had already invented a dozen different stories. Some claimed Evelyn had deceived the Duke for financial gain. Others insisted William had finally come to his senses and refused to marry out of obligation. Every rumor carried a different version of the truth, yet none resembled what had actually happened inside the library. Evelyn did not attempt to defend herself. She packed only a single suitcase, thanked every servant who had shown her kindness, and left Ashbourne Hall before sunrise. She did not ask to see William one last time. She believed that leaving quietly would hurt him less. Late that evening, while walking through the now silent guest room she had once occupied, William noticed a small leather notebook resting inside the drawer of her writing desk. He recognized it immediately. It was the journal she had kept throughout the months she believed she would never see again. After a long hesitation, he opened the final page. The last sentence was written in a careful, steady hand. I wasn't waiting for my eyes to heal. I was waiting to believe that your heart had already. William did not sleep that night. Long after the servants had extinguished the lamps throughout Ashbourne Hall, he remained alone in his study with Evelyn's journal resting open before him. The fire had burned low, yet he made no effort to add another log. His eyes returned again and again to the final sentence, reading it until every word settled painfully into his heart. I wasn't waiting for my eyes to heal. I was waiting to believe that your heart had already seen. For the first time since the truth had been revealed, William stopped thinking about Evelyn's silence and began thinking about the fear that had. He remembered the conversations he had overheard during the past months. How many had admired his compassion? Not once could he remember hearing anyone say that he loved Evelyn. At first, those words had never mattered to him. Yet now he wondered whether Evelyn had spent months listening to the same whispers until they slowly became impossible to ignore. Perhaps she had never doubted his kindness. Perhaps she had only doubted whether kindness was enough to build a marriage. The realization struck him with painful clarity. He had spent so much time trying to protect her that he had never noticed how lonely she felt standing beside him. The following morning, William cancelled every engagement on his calendar. When his steward asked whether the postponed wedding should be announced publicly, William shook his head. There won't be an announcement, Your Grace. There will only be gossip. And Miss Hartwell. William looked toward the snow-covered gardens. I'm going to bring her home. Finding Evelyn proved far more difficult than William had imagined. She had not returned to her father's cottage, explaining only through a brief letter that she wished to begin again somewhere no one knew her story. For nearly 3 weeks, William traveled from one village to another, following the smallest fragments of information. A shopkeeper remembered selling traveling supplies to a young woman matching her description. An innkeeper recalled serving tea to a schoolmaster and his daughter. A parish priest believed he had seen them boarding a coach headed toward the coast. Each clue carried him a little farther from London. Each one also strengthened his determination. He was no longer searching because he felt responsible. He was searching because life without Evelyn had become painfully empty. On a quiet afternoon near the beginning of spring, William arrived in a small seaside village overlooking the grey waters of the English Channel. Children's laughter drifted from the open windows of a modest stone building beside the church. As he approached, he heard the sound of a piano. The melody was simple, gentle, patient. William paused outside the doorway. Inside, Evelyn sat beside an old upright piano while 6 children gathered around her. 2 of them held white canes. One little girl rested her fingertips lightly upon the keys, smiling as Evelyn patiently guided her hands toward the next notes. There was peace on Evelyn's face that William had never seen before. She looked up as the lesson ended. For a moment, neither of them moved. The children noticed William first and quietly slipped outside, leaving the room wrapped in silence. "I wasn't expecting you," Evelyn said. "I know. I thought London would have kept you busy." "It tried." She smiled faintly. "It usually succeeds." William stepped inside. "I've been looking for you." "I guessed you might." She folded the music sheets before her, buying herself a few moments to steady her emotions. "Have you come to ask why I left?" "No." She looked at him with quiet surprise. "I already know why." William walked slowly toward the piano. "I've spent weeks thinking about everything that happened. At first, I believed the problem was that you hid the truth from me. And now I think the problem began much earlier." Evelyn remained silent. "I let everyone admire my compassion," William continued softly. "I accepted every compliment about sacrifice and responsibility, but I never once told the world that I loved you. Without realizing it, I left you standing alone against every whisper." Tears gathered slowly in Evelyn's eyes. "I should have trusted you." "You should have. And I should have trusted myself enough to say what was in my heart before fear spoke louder." William nodded. "I loved you long before your sight returned." He smiled sadly. "I simply didn't realize it until I lost you." The room became very quiet. Outside, the sea rolled gently against the rocks below the cliffs. Evelyn walked toward the window. "When my eyesight returned," she said, "the first thing I truly saw wasn't the garden." William waited. "It was your face while you were reading to me. You looked so peaceful that I couldn't bear the thought of changing anything between us." She turned to him. "I wasn't trying to trick you. I know. I was trying to hold on to the happiest part of my life." William crossed the remaining distance between them. "You don't have to hold on to the past anymore." He reached for her hands. "This time, let's begin with the truth." For several seconds, Evelyn searched his face. This time, she saw no guilt. No obligation. Only love. She smiled through her tears. "I would like that." The celebration was smaller than originally planned, attended only by family, close friends, and the children from the seaside music school. There were no extravagant speeches. No public display meant to silence gossip. William had learned that love did not need society's approval. After the ceremony, he led Evelyn to a newly restored building at the edge of the estate. Above its entrance hung a simple wooden sign, the Hartwell Center for Blind Children. Inside were books printed in raised lettering, musical instruments, classrooms filled with sunlight, and gardens designed so every child could safely explore them through touch, sound, and scent. Evelyn stood silently in the doorway. "You built all this?" William smiled. "No." He gently squeezed her hand. "We built it." Children's laughter soon filled the halls as the first students arrived. Watching them, Evelyn rested her head lightly against William's shoulder. Once she had believed that blindness had changed her life forever. Now she understood that it had done something else. It had taught 2 people that compassion may begin a story, but only trust can carry it to a happy ending.